What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here. Path of Exile 3.21 Crucible League is coming, and it's a habit now. I gotta do it. Here's a data dump of PoE Ninja from Softcore Solo Self Found 3.20. Who am I? What is going on here? I'm just a casual, hardcore Path of Exile player. I'm not outstanding, but I can certainly write data down and talk about it, and you can choose to ignore me. So what we're doing here is a little bit different from if you've seen the last few times in this video. What I did is I took solo self-found softcore at the 7-day mark of the last league that was played, and so last time what I did is I wrote down every single or nearly every single 5+ linked skill. This is doing a bit of self-selection into, are they running the skill at all? This allows us to get around problems like, hey, well, if you're playing Righteous Fire and you start doing really well and you put essences on a helmet and you make a 7-link hat or a 6-link hat and it's better than your chest piece, it's going to show up as a 4-link with essence mods in the hat to make it a 6 or 7-link, and that's not going to show when the game is like, what's your 5-link? Do you have a 5-link Righteous Fire? No, I have +3 spell crit, and, that's not the right mod. 30% more elemental damage, whatever, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so there is a different bias here in that I'm just simply saying, is the character running the gem at all? Now, in some cases, it's, are you a Juggernaut and running the Righteous Fire gem? I'm probably catching actual RF characters. But just kind of keep that in mind, that there are going to be some biases for any skill that happens to be run in multiple builds. Anyway, this is, again, snapshotting basically every level break point from 80 up to 100 at the 1 week part of Softcore Solo Self-Found of the previous league, and using which builds seem to not be represented in higher levels or are overrepresented in higher levels relative to how represented they are in lower levels as a decent proxy for actual power level of the skill. So now we transition into the warning about using data and using statistics. We are measuring what truthfully happened in the real world and or Rayclast and Oriath and the Atlas, but we can't pull out intent or any biases here because we're just saying, well, here's what happened. Righteous Fire didn't have any level 100s. Well, why was that? Well, maybe the really good Righteous Fire players play hardcore because that build is invincible when played correctly. Well, we didn't measure them. We only measured the not hardcore juggernauts. There could be other things going on, such as, hey, maybe players in Korea actually play more hours per day. Just on average, culturally, there's more game hours are played. And there's a top Korean influencer who really says, y'all gotta play Wave of Conviction. That's the real build. That's the real, running build. And so more Korean players play Wave of Conviction, and Korean players on average, I'm making this up by the way, might play more hours per day, and so more Korean players on average will be close to level 100, which looks like Wave of Conviction is better, but it's just a behavioral bias. So all these things can be true. In fact, some of them likely are in any given one of these skills. I'm sure there's at least one major behavioral bias in one of these skills because of something. I don't know what it would be, but hey, by the way, that is a very, very real possibility. That said, if you don't have a strong reason to believe such a bias exists, it's probably okay to take this at somewhat face value and let it inform your league start. So TLDR, I'm using relative representation at higher levels to stand in for actual power level, which is really just measuring XP per hour of this skill on average. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But does it do pretty well? I think so. I think it's directionally actually pretty accurate in terms of saying what is OP, what is doing really well, and so it's fun to talk about. So I basically wrote down every ability that had at least 1% representation as a 5-link at kind of any point between level 80 and 90, and then said, okay, cool, we're going to take those skills and then look at them again, but only if they're being run at all. Because, like, hey, I don't think there's going to be a lot of artillery ballista characters who are actually playing Spark. Like, the crossover is not going to be all that large. You have some things like Bane, where there is a lot of crossover, because Bane is a really good way to apply multiple curses at once. Blade Vortex has multiple different builds. So, that's going to be its own kind of interesting thing because you're measuring how is poison doing versus how is cold doing versus how is fire doing. You've got good old Magma Fissure, which has its own bias because if players didn't like it, they're going to hop off because guess what? The build's going to be less optimized because no one has a good actual handle on what the league start's going to be other than just PoB theory crafting. And so Magma Fissure might be better than this represents because people weren't good at this skill yet. We're talking about 7 days in SSF where you don't know what the build's going to be like perfectly and whatnot, right? Summon Raging Spirits has multiple options here. Are you running Wave of Conviction and you're not a Juggernaut? Well, you might be playing 6-link Wave of Conviction. You might also be using it as a setup for, I don't know, Firestorm of all things, but you're using it as a way to apply exposure. All these things are possible and likely and very realistic biases. Let's talk about the fact that I dragged down how many total characters were level 80, 81, 82, 83, all the way to level 100. There were 10 level 100s by the very end. How many of these characters had Seismic Trap on their character? How many were Juggernauts and had Righteous Fire on their character? By the way, I want to point out that if I did this correctly, and to be fair, I did this stuff about a week or so ago, so some of my memory is hazy of how exactly I did this, but let's go ahead and keep doing some more run-throughs of what we've collected, and some of this will actually be useful information. So this was either people who were running Righteous Fire at all, or ones who were running 5-link Righteous Fire, but basically 93 to 94% of, I believe this was 5-link Righteous Fires, were Juggernaut. I believe that's accurate. So basically, Juggernaut was the primary ascendancy by far for actually running Righteous Fire. Explosive Arrow was 48/46%. This is Champion/Elementalist. For the level 90 cohort, which is going to be the second set of numbers here, it was 45% Champion, 50% Elementalist. This means very, very lightly, Elementalist seems to outperform Champion, right? It was very, very close together in the level 80 plus cohort, but the ones who got 90 plus, now again, maybe more hardcore players, more aggressive players, ones who play more hours per day, are more likely to play Elementalist. Could be, and that might explain the overrepresentation at higher levels. This is Trickster, Elementalist, and whatever stands with whatever is O, Occultist. Yeah, Trickster, Elementalist, Occultist was 34, 34, 20% of level 80 characters. That became 32, 39, 16. Meaning, once again, Elementalist appears to be the better performing characters running Vortex. Now, there are several versions of what Vortex can be. There's Cold Dot, there's apparently Vortex Ignite, although I looked into this, I think, briefly, and Vortex Ignite didn't really appear to be much of a thing. But it's, I think, now the second or third league in a row where, I called it last time, Elementalist Vortex is really, really, really good. This is still true. This is the second league in a row where this data is suggesting this to be true. And I think this was Jungron who did a really fast Elementalist Exile kill, I think, using Cold Dot, and yeah, it's really strong. I think he beat his personal best by 30 minutes or something, beating Seismic Trap. So anyway, I'm just saying this appears to be really, really good. And if you want a safe spellcast scaling league starter, I think I can really easily recommend Cold Dot Elementalist. This seems to be very, very strong. And again, Elemental seems to be the ones better performing. Occultist appears to be falling off of the build, and a Trickster more or less held up. We'll talk about how the build did overall a bit later on, but hey, by the way, Elementalist again appears to be the best performing version of that build. Toxic Rain was 82 and then 87% Pathfinder. So Toxic Rain is played almost exclusively as Pathfinder. It overrepresents very slightly as you get higher on. And so, hey, the meta build is Pathfinder, but what about people who were like, oh no, I've got the math going out, I've got the theory, trust me, it's gonna be this build. They didn't show up as much in the 90 plus cohort. So it seems that Pathfinder is the right way of doing it. Now, to be clear, at 90 plus, there were only about 300 Toxic Rain characters. So 3 characters is 1% representation. So if 15 people, if 15 more people decided to play non-Pathfinder Toxic Rain, 15 humans, that's all it would take, this would have looked like, the same numbers at level 90, and this wouldn't exist. So again, variance also exists, in this kind of world, but hey, just saying. So we have Bone Shatter. This is, I believe, Juggernaut and Slayer. It was 55-42 at 80 plus. It remained 55-42 at 90 plus. So Juggernaut and Slayer appear to be, Juggernaut's more popular, but Juggernaut and Slayer appear to be equally powerful in terms of Bone Shatter characters. And again, we'll talk about holistically how Bone Shatter did compared to other skills, but hey, by the way, that's what went on there. We go over to Poisonous Concoction And once again, we have Pathfinder versus Occultist. 5933 became 5340 for, I think, the 4th league in a row. Occultist beats Pathfinder in XP per hour, considering part of XP per hour is getting tier 16s, getting Void Stones, which kills some bosses. Just overall, it really does appear that Occultists either die less or kill more things, and just overall do better in the first 7 days of solo self-found. Or again, for 3 leagues in a row, it's a selection bias of Occultist players just pick this more often. Now, I know Poison Concoction has some really, really big changes to it. The fact that it's going to cost you 1 flask charge per individual projectile thrown. This probably heavily weights you towards needing flask sustain and probably pushes you back towards Pathfinder. Unless there's a way around it, I don't know, haven't researched it. I couldn't tell you. But that is a likely result here. And so, hey, by the way, there were patch notes and the game is a bit different than what was here. Wave of Conviction, not counting a Juggernaut, as this was a very easy way of applying, a very easy way of applying exposure for Righteous Fire build to lower enemy fire resistance. Apparently I wrote Met down here because there wasn't much going on in terms of obvious trends. For the most part, Wave of Conviction appeared to be pretty solidly a support skill in other builds. I did not want to mix methodologies and say, well, we're going to measure everything as a 1 link, just if it exists or not. Spoiler, Determination is a really popular skill. But didn't want to be like, well, in this case, we'll show only 5 link Wave of Convictions, which just feels kind of fraudulent, and so I didn't do it. Is that kind of trolling? Yeah, maybe. Oh, well. Either way, it's mostly support skill at this point. There weren't a absolute ton of 5 link Wave of Convictions, and again, I didn't want to measure in a different way because that's its own extreme biases where it's like, turns out it takes a lot of time to find a 5 or 6 link, which means you're more often measuring level 90 characters, which means its whole like ratio of characters at what level is inherently skewed and completely breaks any usage of data, so I didn't bother. Venom Gyre was pretty much slated exclusively as a Deadeye. Great, we'll move on. Summon Raging Spirit. This was Necromancer and Guardian, so 71% Necro, 24% Guardian at 80+. This became 69% Necromancer, nice, and 26% Guardian at 90+, which means Guardian very, very slightly is overrepresented at higher levels, but that is entirely available due to purely variant, so not much to talk about here, but Summon Raging Spirit, we can talk about how that one performed as time goes on. This one is using Caustic Arrow. This is Pathfinder, Trickster, Occultist, 52, 18, and 14%, became 56, 14, and 20%. So sadly, our poor Trickster appears to be doing pretty poorly in Caustic Arrow build. So again, you could choose to talk about variants. That is not a necessarily wrong thing to do. But Pathfinder and Occultist appeared from limited data to do quite well as Caustic Arrow starts among the cohort. We move on 1 more row into Spark. Spark was 70% Inquisitor, which moved down to 67% Inquisitor as you got higher level. HRP, I'm pretty sure, is me saying Hierophant. I don't know why it's in all caps. Who cares? But anyway, Inquisitor was pretty much 2/3 of all Spark characters, went down very slightly over time. Maybe Hierophant ate a bit at lunch. Maybe Hierophant's actually better. I believe from the patch note that Hierophant got a lot stronger. Now keep in mind, Spark itself got nerfed pretty substantially. So you might want to not play Spark either way. That said, Hierophant is better, so who knows, maybe it's still good. I'm not here to parse the patch notes for you. It's more math than I'm willing to put in here. Then we have Magma Fissure, which ended up being Champion, Chieftain, and Slayer at a 39, 31, 11% distribution. This became 38, 30, and 23% distribution, so Slayers appeared to do really, really well as Magma Fissure compared to the other classes here. Of course, there were some other builds tried as well, because you can see the math doesn't add up to 100% in these cases. But Magma Fissure Slayer is maybe actually kind of nice. So keep that in mind as a possibility that even if it looks like Magma Fissure falls off, maybe Slayer Magma Fissure isn't quite as hard. It's certainly possible. Blade Vortex, I'm pretty sure, is like purely Occultist. We're just going to move on. This is often a swap out of Poison Concoction. Let's just move forward, though. So we have Bane, Occultist, Trickster, and I believe Ascendant. If I recall correctly, 71, 9, and 9% became 66, 8, and 11%. So Bane Occultist slowly falls down in priority over time. Again, no surprise that Occultists are running Bane. They get +1 curse in their Ascendancy. They start on the side of the tree that gets another +1 curse. And again, Bane is frequently used as a way of applying multiple curses, unless I'm really misunderstanding what Bane does. So this can just be a curse applicator instead of it actually being a big Bane link doing stuff as a chaos damage build overall. But again, a breakdown of these tendencies there, and we can talk about how it does compared to everything else. So we have Lightning Arrow. I wanted it to all fit in one row, so I I spelled arrow as a capital R, capital O. RO. Yeah, I know. Deal with it. Either way, Deadeye seemed to outperform Raider overall. Is the cliff notes here. You can see that um, the amount this is in the builds is going down and down and down. There's only 84 lit arrow builds in the first place. You can see how quickly it kind of falls off a cliff, but Deadeye appeared to be doing better than Raider there. And then Artillery Ballista was 72% Raider, and that seemed to hold up between level 80 and 90. So not much to talk about there, but basically just throwing in two of the bow skills that were the most commonly used because I like Pain and I like bow builds, and that has never been very good outside of Toxic Arrow, basically Toxic Rain, whatever. And now I say this. Toxic Rain exists, Explosive Arrow exists, and Caustic Arrow exists. There are, in fact, 3 bow builds in the top 10 of League starters, but in my opinion, none of those count as bow builds. We're going to move on. All right, anyway, this is, by the way, this is entirely Explosive Arrow Ballista. It's all Ballista, by the way, in case this wasn't very obvious. So what does it mean? Well, it means that we measured 90% of all characters. Now, to be fair, we can easily be overcounting. You can see, this is organized, by the way, in order of 5-link counts. So, like, there were more 5-link SRS than Caustic Arrow, more 5-link Spark than Fissure, more 5-link Blade Vortex than 5-link Bane. Oh, there's 400 Banes, because 3-link Bane is really common. And 4-link Bane is really common as Curse Applicator. So again, this is somewhat fraudulent. Just want to really point that out as a very obvious thing. This is not actually using Bane as a primary damage skill, just characters who used Bane and how were they represented as characters overall. Anyway, we roughly captured 90% of all level 80 characters by doing this. I didn't measure any characters that were under 1% pick rate 5-link on anything. So, right, the bottom 10% or so of the ladder is not grabbed here. As level 11s, we also only grabbed, I believe it was 9 out of the 10 possible level 100 characters. Right, there were 10 or so. We didn't get them all. I don't know why it says 91%. Don't worry about it. Maybe it's actually at 90%. Let's find out real quick. What's B24? Nope, it's, oh no, there were, oh, right. We somehow are measuring 11. I don't know. We're just gonna move on. I think we're double counting. This is inverted. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, we're double counting. It doesn't matter. Let's move on. Okay, great. So what are our results? Well, we now go into the actual analysis, which is, hey, what percent of these builds, not of the total ladder, but of the builds we actually measured, which I believe helps account for some biases. Either way, you could do it yourself with just using this as the total, but what percent of the builds we actually measured were Seismic Trap at level 80, and what percent of them, among the builds we measured at 90, at 95, at 100, and we can see that Seismic Trap tends to trend up. Seismic Trap tends to be a build, now potentially played by more aggressive, more hardcore players who put in more hours, but a build that is disproportionately overrepresented in high levels. Righteous Fire Juggernaut actually holds pretty steady 11% until you get to the much, much later levels, and this is no longer the problem of, well, Phreak, you weren't measuring 4-link Righteous Fire hats. Well, now we're measuring literally any Juggernaut who has Righteous Fire on their character, and with the exact same profile of they don't hit level 97 plus very often, and they kind of fall off a cliff towards the very, very end. Explosive Arrow, pretty solid League starter until it finally scales down, and this goes on and on and on. And we can go ahead and look at the just graphs themselves at this point. So here's what you're actually waiting for. How do the individual builds do against one another? We pit them against each other. Last one standing wins. What are the actual good builds for the League starts? Well, Seismic Trap is shockingly very, very good. I know there are changes to the Saboteur. I don't know if Seismic Trap itself is actually any worse. I haven't seen that in the patch notes. I might have missed it. Either way, Seismic Trap certainly was a very strong performer in the previous League start. Righteous Fire, which is any Juggernaut with Righteous Fire equipped on their character. How does it compare to other characters? And it holds on for a very, very long time, slowly wanes in the mid-90s, and then there really aren't any high-level 90 Righteous Fire characters. This means it, again, can easily get to the mid-90s, but just solidly into like tier 16s. But people either don't push 100 on Righteous Fire, and they hop off, though they are, to be fair, playing a fire into area and elemental scaling Juggernaut, so I don't know what else you're going into unless you're respecting your entire skill tree and maybe Ascendancy. I don't think you're going to go Righteous Fire into Bone Shatter, but who knows? Either way, this is how Righteous Fire fared. Explosive Arrow, primarily Ballista, actually kind of fell off a bit as well, certainly lauded lauded as a strong league start, but data seems to indicate not exceptionally strong performance, or maybe the ones who play EA Ballista just simply don't play really deep into the league. Now, again, this is 7 days in. It's not like, oh, they don't play after 4 days. It's just maybe they don't play as many hours per day, and after 7 days, they're chilling at level 89 instead of 97 like some more hardcore players are. It's possible. But again, every single time we see one of these graphs go down, there must be a graph going up somewhere else because what's happening. Speaking of graphs going up, here is Vortex. Vortex was a solid 15% of the cohort for a large portion of the game. Again, there can be some biases here. You can just simply run Vortex on left click while playing an entirely different build. But as it was the most common 5-link of these types of skills, and I looked at a couple options like Creeping Frost, the overlap with Vortex was like 99%. These seem to be really heavily interlinked. These are kind of the skills that people are using, but if you're running Vortex on your character, this was how people tended to do. Obviously, level 100, there were only 10 such characters, so you're gonna have some variance here, but yeah, this character archetype seemed to do quite well and seemed to be quite powerful. So Vortex is kind of up into the right, and again, if you self-select into playing Elementalist Vortex, it's maybe even better here and seems to really be a very strong league start. Move on to Toxic Rain, which actually held on quite well, but again, only to relatively high 90s. Again, saying, hey, they didn't have a level 98, 99, 100 is a pretty fraudulent stat. I actually think the next time I do this video, I just stop at 98 and don't show the level 100s because I think it kind of betrays the graphs a little bit, and the last little trail off is maybe a bit fraudulent, but either way, no level 100s Toxic Rain characters, but they held on really well. Toxic Rain up till level 97 is seemingly a very strong league starter. Bone Shatter is fully up to the right, though. Yes, you have the undulations at 99, 100. Oh, there were 4 level 99s, but only 1 level 100, so it fell off a cliff. But there were 3 99s who were almost 100, and we're, not tracking them as a last little data point. Realistically, Bone Shatter does very well. So it's once again, Reddit likes to complain that melee is bad, but Bone Shatter is one of the very best performing scenarios in a solo self-found, you can't easily find melee weapons build. And guess what? Bone Shatter is like the number 3 league starter in the game. It's a melee skill that you play as Juggernaut or Slayer. There's multiple viable ascendancies, and it outperforms Toxic Rain. It outperforms Explosive Arrow Ballista. It outperforms Spark, spoiler alert. It outperforms Righteous Fire. It's just less popular than the other ones, but Bone Shatter is a top 3 skill. Let's be clear, okay? Let's move on. Poisonous Concoction. This is the most up and to the right by far. This, to be clear, is the best skill in the game. This skill is absurd for pushing into high levels of XP. There were 2. Now, some of this is because there were 2 level 100s, but you can kind of see still a pretty smooth curve upwards. Now, you could argue actually that the thing going down towards 94 is actually indication that it's not a very good skill that eventually peters off in red maps, and it's just a few psychopaths really pushed to level 100. That's actually a reasonable argument, to be fair, I suppose. So you may see this otherwise, but this graph is very up and to the right. I mean, I think even 97 is a reasonable breakpoint. If we look and we kind of scroll back up, like 97 is still 176 characters overall in the game. And if we look at for Poisonous Concoction, there were 15 of them. There are 15 level 97 points concoctions, which is a solid, 10% or so of the overall ladder, which honestly is pretty good. So I don't know. I think there's a pretty, and that's, again, double the resting average of 5% coming in at level 80. So, I mean, this skill, I would argue, deserved to be nerfed. It might feel somewhat unplayable. I don't really know. We'll have to see how it goes. It might be forced Pathfinder. It might just be that, hey, you've got to put more flask nodes down, and then it's the same character, but you're down 1 damage wheel. I really don't know. I know Wither Effect is somewhat down. Maybe this thing got hit 3 different ways, but this was a very good 3.20 league starter. This is any character running Wave of Conviction, not counting Juggernaut. This is excluding Juggernaut from the list of characters. And basically, if you ran Wave of Conviction at all as an exposure, now, again, there could be biases here. It's like, oh, well, I got the, Exarch Embers and whatnot, and I got exposure on my gloves or boots, or if you actually get exposure from. I actually, to be honest, actually don't know. That's entirely possible that people, as they progress in and they're level 98 and they've been playing the league for 6 days, they're like, I've got exposure somewhere else, and they get rid of Wave of Conviction on the character. That is an entirely reasonable assumption to come up with here. Or it could be that Wave of Conviction, most of its pick rate was actually league starting, and it just doesn't hold on. I'm just saying, I have to choose a methodology. I chose the non-5-link version of the methodology, and this means that support skills get represented in different ways here. I can't tell you 100%, but it seems to indicate that Wave Conviction Ignite is potentially not a great league starter, but again, a little bit of fraudulent here. Venom Gyre. Yes, pronounced Gyre. That's how you say the word. As we continue on YouTube to explain how to pronounce words. I had to look it up myself. Don't worry about it. Either way, Venom Gyre is very flat and then up and to the right. So again, this is largely for the last few levels being like, oh, there are some players who push really, really hard playing Venom Gyre. And yes, they do really, really well here. What's interesting is this is, of course, solo self-found. So any skill where someone's power level is in getting the Vol skill is underrepresented here. Because you can't guarantee that you get Vol Venom Gyre. It's certainly possible to get it, and maybe at a certain point, if you're level 98, you've probably run enough Vol side areas or corrupted gems or something to have gotten yourself a Vol Venom Gyre, but it is entirely possible that some characters are being held back by not getting this gem, whereas if you're playing softcore trade like I'm going to be, this thing is 1 alch, right? So just a thing to keep in mind that some skills that really rely on Vol skills actually will do better than the SSF trend will seem to indicate for them. Because even if you do have the gem by like day 4, you could have had that stuff the second you left the campaign, or in Act 7 or something, and actually had that for boss fighting. So something to keep in mind in general, that like, hey, these characters actually be allowed to push faster if they had access to the Vol gem sooner on. We then move on to Summon Raging Spirits with, oh boy, this is a very obvious trend. Again, this could be generic summoners are out there that have it socketed sometimes, and then they slowly drop the socket as they get, I don't know, more possible summoned skeletons or absolution minions or something. I doubt that pretty highly. These are in order of what was most 5-linked. Summon Raging Spirit was a relatively common 5-link plus skill, and it just does not hold on compared to other skills at XP per hour. Now, the call might be that players who play summons don't play as many hours per day. These could be players who, they self-select as players who don't have as much free time, or they fatigue easily, wrist issues, things like that. And so, it's why they play a lower APM skill. It might even be SRS totems. I think you could do that. There are possible biases here, but it certainly does not appear to be a well-performing hardcore build. High hour build. I realize hardcore has its own term, but I keep using it. I'm not smart. We move on to Caustic Arrow, which has a somewhat similar curve to Toxic Rain, where it seems to very, very lightly trend downwards. There are no Caustic really arrow players who went for 99 or 100, but I mean, it relatively held on to 95 through 98. I mean, some spikes here, but again, variance to be expected around here. Maybe trends a bit downwards, but again, is holding on quite well overall, outside of the 9900, which again, I think is not a reasonable thing to continue to measure. But we move on to Spark, which this is a pretty obvious trend. Yeah, it holds on in the 80 to sort of 92 bracket, but pushing deep reds, pushing for really high levels of XP, even though Spark, I feel like, scales so well. It scales off projectile speed, it scales off pierce chance, it scales off of crit, and a bunch of other stuff. But either players just who opted into Spark didn't want to play really, really late game, but 97 zero count is pretty early here, and the fact that even you can see 96, 95, 94, it's still not looking the best. That people really seem to not hold on this skill as well as others. This is like pretty stark to me and a little surprising, but that it is very obvious that Spark didn't seem to be that great of a pushing league starter for whatever reason. Volcanic Fissure, oh, wow, yeah. So, again, we are only even measuring at the first place if characters got to level 80 running Volcanic Fissure. And if you're like speed running the acts, that means you're, getting out of the acts by at or under level 70. If you're over leveling, you're probably still high to mid 70s. So this is, you definitely did some mapping to be here at all, right? To be level 80, you've almost certainly done most to all of your white maps, is vaguely what I'm going to guess. The break point here. So it's like, of characters who made it midway through white maps, maybe to yellow maps, I don't remember like exactly what my breakpoints ended up being. I'm also really, really slow campaign clear. But either way, of characters who got to like tier 5 maps and beyond, very few kept up with it. Now, you're going to have a very large number of players who are going to try out the new thing, and it might just not be for them. This could be actually, I don't find it fun. And next league, it's going to start at 2% and remain at 2% for a lot more, right? This is entirely a reasonable assessment of how this works out. We had the exact same thing last league with Lightning Conduit, where it fell down to the right really rapidly because people tried it and many decided it wasn't fun. They'd rather re-roll a new character. This is an expected curve for a skill like this, it just in general, right? But either way, pretty stark, and no one liked enough to stick with it to 97 plus, despite being a relatively popular league starter. You can see even as we go to Blade Vortex, like there were some 97s in that one, and Volcanic Fish, despite being a relatively popular start with 2.5% of players, or like 2.7% of players, at the yellow map tier, they all quit by 97 or just, didn't play as much or something by the time we snapshotted. So then we go to Blade Vortex, which, at least when I played this last league, was a switch off of Poisonous Concoction, and even with people potentially switching off of Poison Concoction onto Blade Vortex, you saw that graph still went up and to the right. So Concoction is, again, in 3.20, very, very strong. Blade Vortex holds on reasonably well, but doesn't seem to be a very good push in 98 or so. But, again, seems to be fine. And some players were actually, running this, pretty earlier on, right, running it at 80 plus. So, again, seems to be a reasonable skill overall. Anyone using Bane, the graph looks kind of like this. Again, the last few levels is purely a measure of, hey, how many players, of the one character who pushed level, of the 10 characters who pushed level 100, one of them happened to be using Bane. Now, was it actually using Bane as your damage source? Was it a curse applicator? I honestly didn't look. And what's interesting here, right, is like, hey, theoretically, this is a mix of people who are using Bane as a primary damage tool, which is about 1/4 of Bane users, and those using Bane as a way to apply curses for a Poisonous Concoction, not a cultist build. If you're not going to use Blasphemy to do your curse applications, you're going to use Bane to apply Temp Chains and Enfeeble and Despair? Despair. Probably drop Enfeeble if you're not a cultist. Either way, like, okay, well, all the Toxic Rain characters, all the Pathfinder Poison Concoction players, all of the Caustic Arrow players are probably running Bane as a support skill, and we had just measured Toxic Rain and Poison Concoction and other stuff. So, hey, by the way, and remember how we noticed that occultists tend to overperform Pathfinders and Poison Concoction, and Poison Concoction is really overrepresented at high levels, and guess what? Occultists who are running Blasphemy on their auras so that they can have Explodey aren't running Bane, right? So, biases, right? But hey, this is the shape of the data, and again, not running it as 5-link stuff here because that would incredibly bias the data in other ways. Moving on. Lightning Arrow, ouch! As I said, I am a glutton for punishment. I like me some bow skills, and wow, does Lightning Arrow suck really hard. Right? Like, this is Volcanic Fissure, where people quit because they didn't like the skill. People know what Lightning Arrow is, and this graph is identical. Like, these people quit the skill and rerolled. This is people actually opted into Lightning Arrow knowing what the skill does. This thing sucks really hard. You can get to yellow maps, but man, do you not get to play red maps at all, is what this basically says. Now, the nice thing is, bow skills are getting among the largest buffs because, hey, you can be permanently ranged, so you don't necessarily need the fact that the Grace and Determination or Reservation masteries are gone. It might not matter as much for you because you're not going to be in as much danger. There's a global reservation efficiency thing, which now allows that to make hatred a bit nicer. And there's +2 arrows on the passive tree, which is really, really good. This can do things like that you run LMP instead of GMP for a, I assume, smaller, less damage modifier, or it means you have way more arrows on like Barrage for your single target or whatever. Or Barrage support in Lightning Arrow. I don't know, whatever. However you do it, I don't really know. Snipe Gem might actually be good, or it might not. I don't know either. But hey, Lightning Arrow is really, really bad in 3.20, and is getting +2 arrows and potentially a better overall passive tree in 3.21. Will this save Lightning Arrow? Maybe. It's also getting a Vol skill. That might be enough. Ice Shot's also getting a Vol skill. Maybe that's the better one. I really do not know, but without the buffs, this skill is bad. I was tempted to start Lightning Arrow this league, and then I did this analysis, and I'm like, I'm not starting Lightning Arrow this league. And then I saw the live stream and the patch notes, and I'm like, I might start Lightning Arrow this league. Don't let me start Lightning Arrow this league. And I'm sure it's bait. I'm sure it's bait. Even Captain Lance knows it's bait. Anyway, we then have Artillery Ballista, as this was just me digging in for like, but are there attack-based builds where the damage on the bow matters and I can use a bow? I like that Artillery Ballista. Which, to be fair, can be a secondary 6 link as, some supportive single target, some extra clear or whatever. But even if you are running like a double 6 link or double 5 link setup with a bow to use artillery ballista to put them down and let them deal damage for you, it still trends downward. Now, it does not trend downward nearly as hard as lightning arrow, right? This falls off a cliff. This is like just straight up soapbox derby. This is at least, almost playable. And to be honest, with plus arrows on the tree, artillery ballista being a core part of your build, like how much buff do you really need before this is actually up into the right trend, right? Where you can actually clear red maps and it's going to be okay. You have that much more power. The answer is maybe enough, right? Like I think there is a world where it's like, actually, yeah, we could probably run this. It's a thought. It might not be true, but that's the rundown. So we'll go ahead and do a quick TLDR on fairly biased results from this data scrape. It means that Seismic Trap appears to be very, very good. Righteous Fire does not have a lot of players who play it long term, but it does hold on until mid-90s pretty well. Explosive Arrow Ballista does not hold on really well at all, and it does not seem to push deep into red maps. Vortex is outstanding for 2 years in a row, 2 leagues in a row, I should say, and really, I have to recommend Vortex Elementalist appears to be awesome. Cold That Elementalist appears to be very, very, very good. You should really consider league starting it. This is maybe the most slept on amazing build in the game is Vortex Elementalist. Toxic Rain holds on pretty well. No one pushed 99 or 100 really, but Toxic Rain is clearly a very good league starter. I know there's some nerfs to chaos damage overall in the patch notes, but hey, might still be decent. Bone Shatter is truly excellent. I am not certain if the patch notes actually buffed Bone Shatter, but really this thing is competing with the likes of Poisonous Concoction and Toxic Rain and even somewhat Seismic Trap in XP per hour. This thing is a behemoth and a really, really, really good skill. Poison Concoction indeed does very, very well. Some of this might just be that there's some level 97, 98, 9900 players who really pushes very, very hard, but the skill clearly has held on throughout 3.20, but because there are nerfs to the skill, because it's going to consume way more flash charges, this might be a non-starter for 3.21. Wave of Conviction, this is mostly being used as a support skill, seems to kind of fall off, not using it, not counting Juggernauts specifically, but still, Wave of Conviction is going to use some Spark builds and other stuff. This is not the most representative bit of data, but Wave of Conviction a little bit down to the right. Venom Gyre appears doing very, very well. Now, this last uptick is because there were some people, right, level 98, 9900, that pushed toward 100 with Venom Gyre. So some very, aggressive, high game hours played Venom Gyre player, so one of the 10 level 100s was a Venom Gyre player. Otherwise, though, a pretty flat graph. So, hey, for an attack-based build that requires getting a solid claw, at least if essence onto a claw, it held up really well against things like Poisonous Concoction and Toxic Rain that doesn't require gear to scale. They only scale off gem level, and these things are able to push level 98, 99, as well as those skills did, which means Venom Gyre really does hold on in a low gear league start scenario, and obviously gets even better with trade. So Venom Gyre is a big winner. And again, we are measuring softcore SSF, which means, yeah, anything that requires a good weapon gets substantially better in a trade environment where you can just, apparate it out of thin air because you can just pay for it. Summon Raging Spirits sucks. Caustic Arrow is not too bad. Falls down a little bit over time. It could be that people swap out of Caustic Arrow into other league starters. I don't think it's really true. It's fine, basically. It's just sort of, this feels like a C-tier sort of graph for me. Spark is another sort of C-tier graph here where it holds on until sort of early 90s, but either no one who plays a lot of hours chose to play Spark, which I don't think is true, or it just, for some reason, really slowed down at pushing the later levels, and maybe just requires more gear. I'm a little surprised that Spark doesn't have as good of a graph as something like Venom Gyre here, but appears to be the case where Spark just isn't really that good at pushing deep reds according to this data. Could be other biases, fine, but what it looks like. Volcanic Fissure, people quit en masse. This is definitely going to be rife with behavioral biases, where people are just like, actually, I don't like the skill, it doesn't feel good enough, and they quit and make a new character. Or it just really can't push reds. Probably mix of the two. Either way, whatever. Most people who played played Volcanic Fissure didn't stick with it. Blade Vortex, which is a mix of cold and poison, held on reasonably well until we got towards sort of later 90s here, where 96, 97, 98, 99, 100 didn't really have the same representative numbers. If we cut off at 96, this would look reasonable here, sitting at around 2.5% of the ladder at most points in time, but decent case to be made that Blade Vortex does not quite push all that hard to 100. Anyone who uses Bane at all This is really measuring using Bane as a support skill primarily. In general, on average, it's either like poison builds tended to drop Bane as they got later on in levels, or we are measuring a decent amount of Bane as a 5 or 6 link for damage, and that's falling off a little bit as well. But again, not measuring the 5 link version because it has its own biases, and the graph is a little bit down to the right for using Bane as an ability. Lightning Arrow is horrible. Thankfully, it's getting buffed in 3.21 with the passive tree, so maybe it'll be good, but don't know. Meanwhile, Artillery Ballista is actually maybe the best non-bait hit-based bow skill in the game, as far as league start data seems to indicate. Artillery Ballista, being a hit-based bow skill, is really up against it in terms of finding good gear, because you kind of want a good bow and a good quiver, and they both need to provide you damage, and good luck getting your Synthoplasm for +1 arrow, and now instead the Synthoplasm is gone, and it's just there's 2 on the tree, which is going to be a really, really big deal for bow skills overall, and Artillery Ballista is a pretty solid ability for holding on, pushing towards reds, accounting for buffs coming in, because obviously it falls down by half. You can see it goes from, about 0.8% of the ladder to about 0.4% of the ladder, from level 80 to 94. That is a half drop off. That is a very big deal. This looks bad, but again, to consider the fact that, hey, +2 arrows in the tree, maybe that's good enough for Artillery Ballista plus some other bow skill, probably not named Lightning Arrow, to be enough. I don't know. I wouldn't risk it personally. I would just play Venom Gyre. That thing looks great. That's the synopsis. Hope you enjoyed the video. See you next time. Bye-bye.